The V-2 rocket. Terror from the stratosphere. The V-2 was Nazi Germany's most advanced weapon of World War II. This long-range guided missile traveled faster than the speed of sound and struck without warning. Powered by a liquid-fuel rocket engine, it became the first man-made object to reach space, crossing the edge of Earth's atmosphere in June 1944. It was a technological miracle wrapped in horror. By late 1944, over 3,000 V-2 rockets were launched at cities including London, Antwerp, and Liege. Thousands of civilians died, and no defense system could intercept the weapon once airborne. The rocket fell from the edge of space faster than sound itself. Strangely, despite its terrifying speed, the V-2 was incredibly inaccurate, often missing its target by miles. It was a weapon of terror, not precision. The V-2's development was closely tied to Wernher von Braun and his team of German scientists. When Germany collapsed, they didn't go down with it. Americans and Soviets raced to capture the technology and its creators. Von Braun and over 100 engineers relocated to the United States under Operation Paperclip. Soviet forces seized what remained at the production facilities. Germany never launched another V-2. The weapon's remains were scattered across Europe, buried in forests, and abandoned in underground factories. The rocket that touched space ended its days as scrap metal and forgotten blueprints. Silbervogel, the impossible space bomber. Imagine a plane that could bomb New York and land in Japan without touching the ground between. That was Silbervogel, or Silverbird, a radical Nazi proposal that looked more like science fiction than engineering. Designed by Eugen Sanger and Irene Brett, Silbervogel was meant to launch from a rocket-powered sled, skim the edge of space in a series of bouncing trajectories, and deliver its payload halfway across the world. It would literally skip across the upper atmosphere like a stone on water. Silbervogel never progressed beyond detailed plans. The project's complexity was staggering. Re-entry heat was massively underestimated. The wings weren't strong enough for high-speed atmospheric friction. The cost was astronomical. The original proposal ran over 900 pages, too dense and confusing for Nazi officials to approve. By 1944, a condensed version was submitted, but it was already too late. Resources were gone, and the war was lost. After the war, Sanger and Brett fled to France. The Soviets attempted to kidnap them, desperate to build their own version of the space bomber. They failed. Americans later echoed similar concepts with the X-20 Dinosaur program. None ever flew. All that remains of Silbervogel is a dream captured in yellowing blueprints and a design that was decades ahead of its time. BA-349 Natter. The Suicide Interceptor. The BA-349 Natter represented Nazi Germany's desperation in the final months of the war. Unlike conventional fighters, this strange rocket-powered aircraft was designed to launch vertically like a missile, intercept enemy bombers with a burst of unguided rockets, and then allow the pilot to parachute back to Earth while the aircraft itself was recovered separately. It was a desperate attempt to protect the crumbling Third Reich from devastating Allied bombing raids. The Natter was constructed mostly from wood to conserve metal and powered by a rocket engine. It was cheap, extremely fast, and dangerously unstable. On February 28, 1945, it flew for the first and only time with a pilot aboard. Oberleutnant Lothar Seibert was killed when the aircraft spun violently out of control seconds after liftoff. The cockpit canopy detached, possibly striking him unconscious. Others blame a catastrophic control system failure. Regardless, the result was fatal. Only a handful of Natters were built. The program was shut down immediately after the crash. With World War II nearly over and Germany running out of time, resources, and territory, this vertical launch interceptor was quietly buried in the archives. One flight. One death. A strange wooden rocket lost to history before it ever engaged an enemy bomber. Me-163 Comet. The rocket fighter of death. The Me-163 Comet was Nazi Germany's boldest and most dangerous aviation experiment. It became the world's first operational rocket-powered fighter aircraft, designed to climb faster than anything else in the sky and destroy Allied bomber formations in seconds. But the technology that made it extraordinarily fast also made it a death trap. The comet was fueled by C-Stoff and T-Stoff, a highly volatile chemical combination that could explode with the slightest contamination or improper handling. Ground crews wore protective suits because spills could dissolve human flesh. Accidents during fueling were frequent and horrific. Even when the plane launched successfully, landing it was a nightmare. The comet had no landing gear, only a retractable skid. Pilots had to glide back to Earth after just 7 to 8 minutes of powered flight. The landing approach was essentially a controlled crash. Despite its incredible speed, exceeding 600 miles per hour, it didn't have enough fuel or flight time to engage effectively. It could intercept bombers briefly, fire a few cannon rounds, and then glide back, hoping to survive the landing on rough terrain. The wooden wings were fragile, prone to damage, and could break apart under stress. Many pilots never returned. As the war neared its end, jet aircraft like the Me-262 proved far more reliable and effective. The comet was abandoned as a fascinating but ultimately impractical experiment in speed. Horten Ho-229, the stealth jet that almost was. If any Nazi aircraft looked like it came from another era, it was the Horten Ho-229. Shaped like a sleek flying wing with no traditional fuselage or tail, it was one of the earliest attempts at stealth technology combined with jet propulsion. Designed by the Horten brothers, the goal was to create a fast, radar-resistant fighter using wood, jet engines, and revolutionary aerodynamics. It was decades ahead of its time. The first glider version flew in March 1944 and performed surprisingly well. But when the project was transferred to Gotha wagon fabric for production, problems multiplied. Internal sabotage by forced laborers, constant design modifications, and limited access to the preferred BMW 003 engines slowed progress dramatically. The second prototype, powered by Junkers Jumo 004 engines, crashed during its third test flight in February 1945. Test pilot Lieutenant Erwin Ziller died after an engine fire caused the aircraft to spiral uncontrollably into the ground. Despite these setbacks, the Luftwaffe still believed in the design. Production was rushed. The third prototype, V-3, was nearly complete when American forces arrived. It was captured by General Patton's Third Army and shipped to the United States for evaluation. The Ho-229 never flew again. Today, it sits in storage at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, a testament to what might have been the first operational stealth jet fighter. DFS-346, the Soviet-German speed demon. Nazi Germany produced so many paper projects that some seem to belong in science fiction rather than real skies. The DFS-346 was one of these, a strange rocket-powered aircraft designed to fly faster and higher than anything else. Shaped like a missile with swept wings, it was carried under a bomber and released at altitude before igniting its rocket engine. After World War II ended, the Soviets captured this design and attempted to make it work. Initially, the concept looked promising. The DFS-346 was meant to push the boundaries of supersonic flight with its sleek aerodynamic frame. But problems appeared immediately. Wind tunnel tests revealed dangerous instability. Controls didn't respond properly at high speeds. The aircraft had a tendency to stall with no possibility of recovery. Even the pilot's seat and safety restraints failed during testing, causing serious injuries to test personnel. By 1951, the Soviets had completed one powered prototype. On September 14, test pilot Wolfgang Zeiss fired the rocket engine at over 30,000 feet and reached 560 miles per hour. But the aircraft stopped responding to control inputs. It veered off course and began losing altitude rapidly. Zeiss ejected using the experimental escape capsule, one of the first of its kind. He survived. The aircraft did not. The DFS-346 program was abandoned shortly after. Another German design that promised the future but delivered only failure. Die Glock, the Bell of Mystery. Many researchers believe Die Glock never existed. But isn't that the nature of black projects and wartime secrets? What if this project was quietly abandoned, mysteriously erased, and buried forever under layers of classified documents and wartime chaos? Die Glock, German for the Bell, was allegedly one of Nazi Germany's most secretive and bizarre experiments. Shaped like a large bell, approximately 12 feet high and 9 feet wide. The device supposedly used strange glowing metals and produced deadly radiation. Inside were two counter-rotating cylinders filled with a purplish metallic substance called Cerium-525, possibly mercury plasma or a mercury isotope. The machine pulsed with blue light during operation. Witnesses claimed it distorted time, created anti-gravity effects, or produced unknown field phenomena. Some believed it was an attempt at anti-gravity propulsion. Others whispered about time manipulation experiments. Rumors suggest that concentration camp prisoners were used during testing, with many dying from radiation exposure and other unexplained causes. The project allegedly operated under SS supervision and was moved from Lower Silesia as Allied forces advanced. At war's end, Die Glocke vanished completely. Some claim the Soviets seized it. Others believe Americans made a secret deal to acquire it in exchange for allowing certain Nazi officials to escape prosecution. The truth remains buried. Die Glocke was either abandoned by design or hidden so well that even today, we cannot confirm its existence. The Sun Gun, space-based superweapon. The Sun Gun project sounds like something from a science fiction comic. But during World War II, Nazi scientists seriously considered building it. Also known as the helio beam, this weapon was based on an ancient concept, using a giant mirror to concentrate sunlight and incinerate targets on Earth. The mirror would be mounted on a space station orbiting approximately 5,000 miles above the planet. The concept originated with physicist Hermann Oberth, who imagined a 100-foot-wide concave mirror to reflect concentrated sunlight. Later, German scientists at Hillersleben expanded the design dramatically. They proposed a massive structure made of metallic sodium, covering approximately 3.5 square miles. According to their calculations, it could set entire cities ablaze or boil sections of the ocean. The concentrated beam would be adjustable, allowing operators to target specific locations with pinpoint accuracy. The Sun Gun was never built. The technology required for space stations didn't exist in the 1940s. Nazi Germany didn't have the time, resources, or orbital capability to attempt such a project. American interrogators were told by captured German scientists that it might take 50 to 100 years to complete. That timeline was enough for the project to fade into fantasy. The idea was filed away with other impossible dreams. The Sun Gun remained a story, a terrifying vision of orbital destruction that was abandoned before it ever left the drawing board. The Krummlauf, the gun that shot around corners. The Krummlauf was one of Nazi Germany's strangest weapon modifications. It was a curved barrel attachment designed for the Sturmgewehr 44 rifle, built to allow soldiers to shoot around corners or from inside tanks without exposing themselves to enemy fire. It included a periscope sight so the shooter could aim while remaining in cover. On paper, it was a clever tactical solution. In practice, it was a dangerous disaster. The main problem was basic physics. Forcing a bullet through a curved barrel created extreme stress on both the barrel and the projectile. The metal warped and cracked rapidly. Bullets shattered mid-path, exiting the barrel as fragments rather than intact rounds. Instead of precise aim shots, the Krummlauf produced a blast pattern similar to a shotgun. That might seem useful in close-quarters combat, but it wasn't what the designers intended, and it made the weapon unpredictable and unreliable. Multiple versions were produced with barrels bent at 30 degrees, 45 degrees, 60 degrees, and even 90 degrees. Most had extremely short operational lifespans. The 30-degree variant lasted approximately 300 rounds before failure. The 45-degree version barely managed 160 rounds. Engineers tried adding vent holes and protective shields to improve durability, but nothing solved the fundamental problem. Eventually, the concept was dropped. Even in a war filled with desperate measures and experimental weapons, the Krummlauf was too risky and unreliable for practical use. The Brewster Buffalo, America's failure. The Brewster Buffalo was one of the first United States Navy monoplane fighters to see combat in World War II. Built by the Brewster Aeronautical Corporation, it arrived with high expectations and modern features including a fully enclosed cockpit, retractable landing gear, and an arrestor hook for carrier operations. On paper, it seemed ready to dominate aerial combat. But warfare evolved faster than the Buffalo. By the time it entered serious combat, it was already obsolete. The aircraft was heavy, sluggish, and dangerously unstable in dogfights. Pilots found it difficult to maneuver. In the Pacific theater, it was completely outmatched by Japan's nimble Mitsubishi A6M0. The Buffalo simply couldn't compete in speed, agility, or climbing ability. It became an easy target for experienced Japanese pilots. Several countries used the aircraft: Britain, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Finland. Only the Finnish Air Force achieved notable success, using it against Soviet aircraft in the harsh northern skies where different tactics and opponents allowed it to perform adequately. Elsewhere, it was abandoned quickly in favor of faster, more reliable fighters like the Grumman F-4F Wildcat. The Buffalo's legacy became a cautionary tale about how rapidly technology could become outdated in wartime and how yesterday's innovation could become today's liability. The Maus. The unstoppable tank that couldn't move. The Panzerkampfwagen 8 Maus was the heaviest fully enclosed armored fighting vehicle ever built. It wasn't just large, it was monumentally enormous. Measuring over 33 feet long, nearly 12 feet wide, and weighing over 188 tons, the Maus was a fortress on tracks. It was so heavy that standard bridges would collapse under its weight, making conventional river crossings impossible. 2 prototypes were constructed, one with a turret mounting a 128mm main gun and a 75mm coaxial gun, and one without armament for testing. Trials began in late 1944, but critical flaws appeared immediately. The tank needed an enormously powerful engine to move its massive frame, but no engine existed that was both powerful enough and small enough to fit inside the hull. Mobility was catastrophic. It was slow, cumbersome, and could only cross rivers by using a specialized snorkel system, submerging completely to depths of up to 26 feet while a second Maus provided electrical power through a cable. The Maus never saw combat. Soviet forces overran the testing facility at Kummersdorf in 1945 and captured both prototypes. German engineers had partially destroyed them during the retreat. The Soviets combined parts from both vehicles to create one functional example. The dream of an unstoppable battlefield monster died in the ruins of Nazi Germany. Today, the surviving Maus stands in the Kubinka Tank Museum in Russia, a massive steel monument proving that sometimes bigger is definitively not better. Project Habakkuk, the ice aircraft carrier. Project Habakkuk was one of the strangest and most ambitious military concepts of World War II. Conceived by British inventor Geoffrey Pike, the idea was to construct a giant aircraft carrier from ice. Not ordinary frozen water, but a revolutionary material called pykrete, made from ice reinforced with wood pulp. Pykrete was significantly tougher and melted far more slowly than regular ice. The goal was to create floating airbases to fight German U-boats in the mid-Atlantic, far beyond the range of land-based aircraft. Habakkuk would have been nearly 2,000 feet long, far larger than any ship ever constructed, and massive enough for heavy bombers to take off and land in the middle of the ocean. A prototype was tested on Patricia Lake in Alberta, Canada, during the winter of 1943. It floated. It impressed observers. But it never progressed further. As Allied technology advanced, the project's strategic purpose evaporated. Longer-range aircraft and increased numbers of escort carriers filled the Atlantic gap that Habakkuk was designed to address. More critically, building the full-size ship would have required more steel for refrigeration equipment than constructing an entire fleet of conventional carriers. By late 1943, the project was quietly shut down. The test model took 3 summers to fully melt. What was once a top-secret engineering marvel became a watery ghost, an impossible ice giant that never sailed beyond a Canadian lake. Fugo, Japan's fire balloons. Japan's Fugo fire balloons share the same desperate wartime energy found in many Axis experiments. These hydrogen-filled balloons were designed to ride the powerful jet stream from Japan all the way to North America, silently carrying incendiary and anti-personnel bombs to United States and Canadian soil. It was an audacious attempt at psychological warfare and the world's first intercontinental weapon system. Each balloon was constructed from paper and rubberized silk, filled with hydrogen, and equipped with incendiary or fragmentation bombs. Launched in batches of hundreds, They rose into the stratosphere using ingenious altitude control systems involving sandbag ballast and altitude-triggered releases, allowing them to stay airborne for days while crossing the Pacific. Japan launched over 9,000 of them between November 1944 and April 1945, hoping that at least 10% would reach North America and start devastating forest fires or kill civilians. Only about 300 were ever confirmed found in the United States, most landing harmlessly in forests, deserts, or farmland. But one tragic incident killed 6 civilians near Bly, Oregon, including 5 children and a pregnant woman, when they discovered an unexploded balloon during a church picnic. That remains the only fatal enemy attack on continental United States soil during World War II. In April 1945, the project was abandoned. 2 of Japan's hydrogen production plants were destroyed by American B-29 bombers, and the enormous cost could no longer be justified for such minimal results. The fire balloons faded into history, a fascinating footnote of innovation and desperation. Schwerer Gustav, the largest gun ever built. Sometimes the Nazis didn't abandon weapons because they failed. Sometimes they were simply too enormous to protect or move. Schwerer Gustav was one such monster. Built by Krupp for World War II, it was the largest and heaviest artillery piece ever used in combat. This railway-mounted cannon stretched over 150 feet long and weighed over 1,340 tons. Simply moving it required 2 parallel sets of custom-laid railway tracks and thousands of support troops for assembly. Schwerer Gustav could fire shells weighing over 15,000 pounds at targets nearly 30 miles away. It was originally designed to break through thick concrete fortifications like those in France's Maginot Line, but by the time it was operational, those fortresses had already been bypassed through Belgium. Instead, Gustav was deployed during the Siege of Sevastopol in 1942, where it fired 47 shells over several days before the barrel wore out from the extreme pressures involved. The logistics were a nightmare. It required thousands of men and weeks to position and assemble the gun. Its immense size made it impossible to relocate quickly or defend against air attacks. As Allied forces advanced and Germany's situation became desperate, only one option remained. In April 1945, retreating German forces demolished Schwerer Gustav with explosives to prevent it from falling into Soviet hands. The largest gun ever built ended its days as twisted metal and shattered concrete, destroyed by its own creators. Complex Reese, the giant underground city. Sometimes the Nazis didn't abandon projects because they failed. Sometimes the war simply moved too fast. That's what happened to Complex Reese, one of the most mysterious construction projects of World War II. Hidden deep in Poland's Al Mountains, this vast network of underground tunnels and chambers was codenamed Reese, meaning giant in German. The name was appropriate. Begun around 1943, the project aimed to carve massive subterranean complexes directly into the mountains, with some chambers reaching heights of nearly 40 feet. Structures were excavated from solid rock and reinforced with concrete. At several sites including Osoka, Lodars, and Ksayas, you can still explore concrete reinforced tunnels wide enough to accommodate vehicles and heavy equipment. The most astonishing aspect is that it was never finished. Only approximately 6 miles of tunnels were completed across all sites, representing just a fraction of the intended scope. As the tide of war turned against Germany, resources evaporated, and advancing Soviet forces pushed closer. By early 1945, the German retreat became too chaotic to continue construction. Tools were abandoned, concrete mixers left to rust, and narrow-gauge railways deserted in place. The purpose of Complex Reese remains debated. Was it meant to be an armaments factory? A military headquarters? A refuge for Nazi leadership? We may never know. Today, these ghostly underground cities remain, silent, dark, and carved into the mountain's heart. Wolf's Lair, Hitler's forest fortress. During World War II, Germany constructed one of its most secretive and heavily fortified headquarters deep in the forests of East Prussia, in what is now Poland. Known as the Wolf's Lair, or Wolfschanz, this massive complex wasn't merely a hideout. It was a high-tech command center hidden among trees, surrounded by minefields, bunkers, and camouflage that made it nearly invisible from aerial reconnaissance. At the complex's heart were giant reinforced concrete structures with walls over 20 feet thick in some cases. These weren't ordinary buildings. They were bomb-proof command shelters packed with war rooms, map centers, and sophisticated communication hubs. Over 2,000 people lived and worked here at its operational peak. Underground generators, anti-aircraft positions, and steel barriers made it more fortress than headquarters. But in late 1944, as Soviet forces pushed westward, the site became indefensible. With the front line just miles away, German engineers packed the bunkers with thousands of pounds of explosives. Retreating forces demolished much of the complex themselves, attempting to erase its secrets forever. The destruction was incomplete. Massive ruins survived, with torn roofs, shattered walls, and scattered reinforcement steel remaining in the forest. Today, the Wolf's Lair stands as a dark tourist attraction, the broken remnants of Hitler's Eastern Command post, where the famous July 20th assassination attempt nearly ended the war early. The Nazi atomic bomb. The weapon that wasn't. Why did Nazi Germany, despite an early lead in nuclear science, never build an atomic bomb? The ambition was real. The scientific foundation existed. But this technology, potentially the most powerful weapon ever conceived, was abandoned before it could change history. The Nazis began exploring atomic energy in the late 1930s. They had brilliant scientists, including Werner Heisenberg, and understood uranium fission. But as World War II progressed, military priorities shifted. Leadership focused on rockets, tanks, and jet aircraft, weapons that offered immediate battlefield results. The atomic bomb was expensive, complicated, and required years of development. It didn't fit Germany's increasingly desperate strategic timeline. Unlike the Manhattan Project, which united thousands of experts and billions of dollars in a single coordinated effort, the German nuclear program was fragmented across multiple laboratories. There was no central leadership, no unified strategy, and competing teams didn't share findings effectively. Add in wartime shortages of funding, materials, and critically, enriched uranium, and the program stalled repeatedly. Compounding these problems, fundamental mistakes were made. German attempts to enrich uranium using different methods than the Americans proved less effective. Their experimental reactors never achieved a sustained chain reaction. Some scientists may have quietly resisted or deliberately delayed progress, understanding the moral implications of such a weapon. Others simply lacked the resources to continue. In the end, what could have been Nazi Germany's most terrifying weapon became nothing more than a forgotten trail of blueprints, failed experiments, and broken equipment scattered across defeated Europe. Had this and other projects been completed, they might have prolonged the war, but ultimately, they could not have changed its outcome. The industrial and scientific might arrayed against Nazi Germany was simply too overwhelming. These abandoned projects remind us that technological ambition without strategic wisdom, resources, and time leads only to failure. The rusting remains of Nazi superweapons stand as monuments to hubris, serving as warnings from history about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the ultimate futility of pursuing victory through terror alone.